Imagine the smell of the air in a place where the future is being built. A smell of clean metal, ozone, and the cold electricity that powers machines the size of houses. You're on a tour surrounded by engineering marvels, but your mind doesn't just see the wonder. It sees the details, the systems, the flaws, and then you see one. A small, almost invisible, but potentially catastrophic flaw in a propulsion diagram. And you speak. Your voice, calm and objective, cuts through the chief engineer's polished speech. The silence that follows is heavier than any machine around you. The looks from your colleagues, the icy contempt on the engineer's face. That's the moment when your genius becomes your crime. Before we dive into this story, tell me which city you're watching from. Today's journey is about a young man named Elias, who dared to speak the truth to power, was humiliated for it, and little did he know that his echo would be heard hundreds of miles away. Subscribe, because you won't believe who was listening. This time it wasn't the student who spoke up, but the teacher. On the bus back to campus, Ms. Sophia Rossi stared out the window, but she didn't see the landscape passing by. She saw the scene repeating itself in her mind, in a painful loop. She had organized that trip to Orion Aerospace with such enthusiasm. It was the opportunity of the year for her mechanical engineering students, and for Elias, she knew, it would be like a pilgrimage to a sacred place. Elias was her brightest student, not in an ostentatious way. He rarely spoke in class, but his work, his projects were of an elegance and depth that bordered on genius. He didn't just solve problems, he felt them, visualized them as three-dimensional systems in his mind. She knew of his passion, and also of his vulnerability. The world, to Elias, was a logical system. People, not so much. The scene in front of the rocket engine prototype was a disaster. The chief engineer, Mr. Gareth Cole, and imposing man with unshakable self-confidence, was explaining the cooling system. Then Elias politely raised his hand. "Excuse me," he said, his voice monotone, "but the positioning of the liquid helium exhaust valve in the diagram creates a risk of thermal stress on the adjacent titanium casing. The continuous flow rate could cause cryogenic embrittlement." Mr. Cole stopped. He looked at Elias as if he were an insect. A sneer spread across his lips. "Thank you for your observation, kid," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "But I think we, with our 30 years of experience, know what we're doing. Let's move on." He turned away, leaving Elias standing exposed under the cold hangar lights, his colleagues' faces a mixture of shame and mockery. Mrs. Rossi's outburst was a lump in her throat. It was guilt. Guilt for encouraging Elias to ask questions, for believing that this environment would celebrate curiosity. She had exposed him and the world in the form of that arrogant engineer had slapped him in the face. She looked at Elias sitting alone in the back of the bus, staring at his own hands. The sparkle she had seen in his eyes earlier at the beginning of the visit had faded, and she felt responsible for extinguishing that light. Sophia Rossi was not a woman to give up. The injustice consumed her. She couldn't let Elias's humiliation be the last word in this story. That same night, she sat down at her computer and wrote the most careful email of her life. It was not an angry email, but one of passionate defense. She addressed it to the Public Relations Department of Orion Aerospace. In the text, she praised the opportunity of the visit, thanked them for their hospitality, and then, with the precision of a lawyer, described the incident. She did not accuse, but contextualized. She explained that Elias was a student of exceptional intellect, and that his observation was not an act of arrogance, but of genuine academic engagement. She quoted, from memory, the essence of the technical correction he had made. Her hope was that someone with a shred of decency would read it, perhaps a formal apology to the class, or better yet, a note of recognition for Elias, something that would restore the dignity that had been taken from him. She pressed send with a heavy heart, a small flame of hope igniting. The response arrived 2 days later. It was quick, professional, and completely empty. The flame of hope was extinguished with a cold breath. The email was a standard corporate template, signed by an anonymous community engagement coordinator. It thanked them again for visiting, said that feedback from future engineers is always valuable, and that they hope to see them again in the future. There was no mention of Mr. Cole, there was no mention of Elias, there was no mention of the incident. It was a plastic smile, a hollow formality. The message was brutally clear. A teacher's concern and a student's humiliation were not even a blip on the radar of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. They were an inconvenience to be dismissed with maximum impersonal efficiency. The false hope was shattered, leaving behind only the harsh reality that, to the system, they were invisible. The most devastating conflict was not taking place in meeting rooms, but inside Elias's mind. The contempt in Mr. Cole's eyes was like a virus that infected his self-confidence. He, who lived in the safe and predictable world of physics and mathematics, now doubted his most precious tool, his own brain. In his apartment, he spent hours in front of his computer, not working on new projects, but reviewing his calculations on cryogenics and titanium alloys. He replayed the scene over and over again. Maybe I was wrong, he thought. He's a senior engineer. I'm just a student. I must have missed some variable. I must have looked like an idiot. The logical certainty that was his foundation began to crack. He, who could visualize complex systems, now saw only the image of the engineer's mocking smile. The outside world, with its social logic based on hierarchy and ego, had finally invaded and corrupted his inner sanctuary of facts and data. Meanwhile, the engineer, Gareth Cole, did not see himself as a villain. He saw himself as a professional under immense pressure. That week, he was dealing with a tight deadline, a problem with parts supply, and a visit from a group of college students he considered a distraction. The student's correction wasn't just an interruption. In his mind, it was a public challenge to his authority in front of his junior staff. His ego, inflated by years of success and deference, couldn't process the possibility that he might be wrong, especially coming from a kid. His defensive and dismissive reaction was not calculated. It was a reflex, the instinct of an alpha animal protecting its territory. It was the tragic failure of a man who had forgotten that knowledge has no age or hierarchy, and that human failure was, at that moment, silently dismantling the confidence of a brilliant young man. The change didn't come from an email, an apology, or a confrontation. The turning point happened in the silence of a lab late at night, and it was initiated by someone no one noticed. During the tour, a little behind the group, was one of Orion's most senior engineers, a man named Dr. Hansen, who was about to retire and no longer cared about office politics. He heard the student's remark and, more importantly, heard the tone of certainty in his voice. He also saw Gareth Cole's arrogant reaction and felt a familiar discomfort. That comment kept echoing in his mind. That night, instead of going home, curiosity got the better of him. He went to the test lab, grabbed his tablet, and accessed the complete schematics of the new engine's cooling system. He found the helium escape valve the student had mentioned. With the calmness of someone who knows every inch of that place, he began to run a thermal stress simulation, entering the continuous flow parameters the boy had mentioned. He watched the numbers and graphs form on the screen, and then his eyes widened. A chill ran down his spine. The boy was right. Completely right. It wasn't a theoretical risk, it was a guaranteed design flaw. A subtle flaw that had passed 3 reviews, but under maximum operating conditions would lead to weakening and catastrophic failure. The boy hadn't just corrected an engineer. He had probably prevented $1 million disaster. Dr. Hansen didn't go to talk to Gareth Cole. He knew Cole's ego was a dead end. Instead, he thought, he had a friend, a former colleague who had left Orion years ago and was now one of the top talent recruiters at a company in California, a company known for valuing disruptive thinking above all else. He grabbed his personal phone, found Catherine Moreau's contact at Tesla, and made a call. "Catherine," he said, "I know it's late, but I think I just found your next genius." The phone rang the following afternoon. Elias answered with his usual flat, "Hello." On the other end was a clear, energetic female voice. "Good afternoon. Am I speaking with Elias?" "Yes," he replied. "My name is Catherine Moreau, and I'm calling from Tesla." Elias was silent. His first logical conclusion was that it was a prank call. His colleagues, such as Oliver, who witnessed the scene, were probably trying to play a joke on him. "Is this a joke?" he asked, his voice flat. "I assure you it's not," Catherine replied with an amused laugh. "A mutual friend gave me your contact information. He told me you made a very insightful observation about cryogenic embrittlement in titanium alloys. Would you mind explaining your line of reasoning to me?" That was the first small victory. It wasn't a joke, it was real. And her question wasn't about the incident, about the embarrassment. It was about science. And there, Elias was at home. The second victory, the most important one, came in the next 20 minutes. With the phone to his ear, he began to explain. And as the technical words, equations, and concepts of thermodynamics flowed from him, something incredible happened. His voice, hesitant at first, gained strength and certainty. The doubt that had tormented him for the past 2 days began to dissipate, annihilated by the irrefutable logic of his own arguments. He wasn't trying to convince Catherine. He was actually convincing himself. He was right. His mind had not betrayed him. Every word he spoke was a brick, rebuilding the wall of his self-confidence. By the end of his explanation, he was no longer the humiliated student. He was an engineer presenting his analysis. And the silence on the other end of the line was not contempt. It was deep and absolute respect. After hanging up the phone, Elias sat in silence for a long time. The conversation with Catherine Moreau had been a catalyst for deep reflection. The world, which had seemed to become an illogical and hostile place, suddenly made a little more sense, but in a new and complex way. He reflected on the nature of knowledge. He had always believed that the truth of a fact was absolute. If an equation was correct, it was correct, regardless of who said it. But the incident with Mr. Cole taught him a hard lesson. In the human world, the validity of a fact is often filtered through the authority, status, and ego of the person presenting it and the person receiving it. His truth was rejected not because it was false, but because it came from an unauthorized source. He thought about his communication style. He presented the fact directly, bluntly, without the layers of social deference that people expected. For him, information was the most important thing. For Mr. Cole, maintaining the hierarchy was more important. It was a clash of operating systems. His mind, optimized for data and logic, collided with a neurotypical world optimized for social interaction and status preservation. He did not regret speaking up. The truth mattered, but he began to understand that communication was as complex a variable as thermodynamics. Perhaps there was a way to present the truth that did not trigger other people's ego defense systems. The call from Tesla didn't mean he didn't need to learn. On the contrary, it meant he had found people who might be willing to find a middle ground, to install a translator between the different operating systems. The hope that was born in him was not for a job, but to find his tribe, a place where logic didn't have to apologize to the ego. Tesla didn't offer him a job over the phone. They did something much smarter. They invited him to visit their gigafactory, with all expenses paid. It wasn't a formal job interview. It was a dive into their universe. When Elias arrived, he wasn't greeted by an HR manager, but by a chief battery systems engineer. And the interview was a 3-hour walk through the factory. They didn't ask him about his strengths and weaknesses. They showed him real problems. "We're experiencing a 0.2% drop in efficiency on this assembly line, and we can't identify the cause," said the engineer. And Elias, in his element, observed, analyzed, and began asking the right questions. His mind saw patterns that others, immersed in their daily routine, no longer saw. The climax of his visit came when he was taken to a meeting room with a whiteboard covering an entire wall. Inside were 3 of the company's most important engineers. They said to him, "Dr. Hansen told us about the cryogenic embrittlement problem. In your opinion, what would be the most elegant design solution?" For an hour, Elias drew, wrote equations, and debated. And they didn't treat him like a student. They treated him like an equal. They didn't just want his answer. They wanted to see how his mind worked. He returned home with a summer internship offer that was, in fact, an invitation to join the forefront of global engineering. The hope wasn't in the contract, but in the feeling he got in that room. The feeling of belonging, of being understood in his native language. Meanwhile, at Orion Aerospace, Dr. Hansen's report forced a quiet but serious internal review. Mr. Gareth Cole was discreetly transferred to an administrative position, away from critical project design. Justice did not come with a thunderclap, but with the whisper of an internal memo. And Elias, thousands of miles away, never even knew. He was too busy designing the future. The truth doesn't care about titles, badges, or hierarchies, and the courage to speak it even if your voice trembles, can echo in the highest and most unexpected places in the world. If Elias's journey has inspired you to value your own unique way of seeing the world, show your support. Like, comment, and share this story. And subscribe to the channel, because somewhere, a brilliant mind may need a reminder that their voice, however different it may be, deserves to be heard.